Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank the organizers of this conference for giving me this opportunity to be presenting some of the ideas on Canada. The part I'm going to present you is not biophysical or natural, it's more on the social sciences. So we are going to be using a different part of the brain. So you will see how far we can take this particular topic. I also would like to acknowledge my co-author, Wheaton. She unfortunately couldn't make it to the conference, and she is more of a climatologist, whereas I'm more of an economist, and therefore the combination of the two is what we are trying to propose here. We need to integrate economics into climate change. What I'm going to present to you is start with a little background, then give you a little glimpse of future extreme events, the past extreme events, and on the impact methodology, the way it has been done, and what are some of the problems with the impact methodology that we have developed so far. So in terms of the background, as we have already seen, predictions of climate change in the Canadian region suggest that there is going to be a growing season, longer season. There are going to be more hot days, less cold days. But the bad part about this climate change for the Canadian prairies is the extreme events. The extreme events are going to increase in frequency, they are going to increase in duration, and therefore their impacts are going to be much more than what we have seen in the past. To those of you who don't know much about the Canadian prairies, we are predominantly an agriculture region. Therefore, the increased frequency of droughts is going to affect the agricultural fabric of the region, and through that the entire region, and perhaps certain parts of Canada as well. This is the location. The green part that you see there is the three prairie provinces, and the three prairie provinces include Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. We are in Canada, the breadbasket. We have about 81% of the area under crop, and about 75 to 80% of the livestock. So if something happens to the agriculture region in the prairie provinces, it's going to affect the entire socio-economic fabric of Canada. It will not only be through the changes in the productivity, but there are also, as we know, linkages. One industry is dependent upon the other industry, and through those linkages, there are going to be more rampant effect on the regions. Now, the bad part is that some of these changes are already happening. We are seeing some of the dry spells. We are also witnessing some of the heavy rainfall, concentrated rainfall, and I'll give you some examples of those. Typically, the dry spells, we call them droughts. They come in different forms. They come in terms of the location. They could be local, they could be regional, and sometimes they are even national in scope. In terms of duration or periodicity, they can be single period droughts or multi-period droughts. In the past, in the prairie provinces, we have seen droughts in 1890s, 1910s, 1930s, 1950s, 1960s, 1980s, 1990, 2005, and 2009 to 2010 in some part of the prairie region. Droughts have been, using the tree-ring data, we have seen a fair amount of droughts happening in the prairie provinces, and this is the data from 1720 to 2010, and the gray area that you see at the bottom of that line are the drought periods that we have seen in the region, some of them as long as 10-year droughts. And this is part of the one of the survey that was commissioned by the British government at that time. And the surveyor basically recommended that the prairie region is not for any kind of habitation. And that survey was done during the time when we had the 10-year drought. So basically what we're talking about, and something has happened to my presentation, and I apologize, I don't know what has happened, but basically what we're talking about is that in the future, these droughts and these extreme events are going to increase. And because of the increase in these droughts, we are going to see a major change in the agricultural productivity of the region. And the agricultural productivity is then going to affect the farmers. Now, we also know we are very vulnerable to climate change in the region, but the other part that can save us is the adaptive capacity. The adaptive capacity, unfortunately, is not even among all the regions, is not even among all the provinces, and we have seen that especially in the areas where irrigation is not being a factor in the agriculture industry, the farmers are more vulnerable. And the higher vulnerability has come because of the fact that people do not have much of the resources to sustain the droughts. We made a study of 2001-2002 drought in the prairie provinces. The 1-year drought, the farmers were able to cope up because they had the stocks from the previous year, they had enough storage capacity, and they could survive. The 2 years of drought, so when we had the back-to-back drought, we had problems in terms of survival. The livestock production went down because the farmers started culling their herd, and as a result of that, the impact of that particular type of drought extended over a period of time. The main problem that I see in terms of the methodology that we have developed for impact analysis is that we look at the drought year and the drought year alone, whereas the droughts and the floods have the tendency to affect not only that particular year, but also the year in the future. The methodology we need to develop, therefore, will have to be not only what happens to the farmers, but what also happens to the processing industries, the farm input industries. We have to look at in terms of what happens to the trade between different parts of the world, and all these factors have to be taken into account in terms of the total impact analysis of droughts and the extreme events. To undertake this, what we need to do is develop an integrated methodology where we take the climate science, we also then bring in the social science in terms of the impacts. We also bring in the social science in terms of the adaptation, and we have to test the type of adaptation that will work best in our system. There has been a fairly dearth of research in terms of the social sciences and climate change. If you look at the funding provided by funding agencies, and Canada is no exception, it's just about all over, the research in terms of physical sciences has increased phenomenally. When it comes down to the social sciences and the climate change, very few agencies are there to provide that kind of attention as it is needed. If farmers have to, or producers and the urban people and everybody else has to make adaptations, they have to be informed. The adaptations are sometimes can be developed by themselves, but the governments of the land has the responsibility to develop that knowledge, do the effectiveness test with the fact that which adaptation strategies are going to work and which adaptation strategies are not going to work. We have to make that kind of a research. The other part of the adaptation is the institutions. Institutions play a very important role in terms of adaptation. If we do not have the right institutions at the local, regional, or the national level, the adaptation is not going to be very effective. And with that, I thank you for your attention. And I apologize for my presentation. I don't know what happened.
Thank you very much, Suren. Do you have some question, please?
I'm Shankar Dayal.
Sorry, 1 minute.
My name is Shankar Dayal. I am Senior Advisor Natural Disaster in India. I know what is drought and what are its impact. So when you categorize this drought, we have 3 types of drought: meteorological drought, hydrological drought, and agricultural drought. So what type of drought are you discussing here is not clear.
In this particular case, we are talking about meteorological drought, which then becomes an agricultural drought. The meteorological drought is, the meteorology is the first thing that we start with, and when there is a problem with the meteorological droughts, then it affects the agriculture. So basically what we're looking for here is the agricultural drought.
You said that these extreme events are increasing. On what scale you have measuring this increase in the extreme events?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
What you said in your presentation that you have found in your research that the extreme events like droughts are increasing day by day.
Right.
So what are your findings? How did you found?
Basically, what we found that by 2050 in the prairie region, the multiple year droughts are going to double, and by 2100, we found that the frequency of the drought is going to triple. But the problem is not just the droughts. The problem is also the concentrated rain events. For example, just this year in the prairies, we had high rainfall in certain parts. About 1.5 million acres of land could not be seeded. And that can be as devastating sometimes as the droughts can be. The only difference is the droughts are more widespread, they affect more people, whereas the concentrated rain events are more concentrated and they're more local. But both of them can be equally disastrous.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Also, question, please. Please.
Hello, Douglas Leifer from Framingham State University near Boston. Sir, and I'm curious as to how the funding situation for water resource development occurs in Canada, for exploration for groundwater resources, for development of the resources, and for distribution of the resources. Is this publicly funded on a provincial level? Is it partially funded on a national level, or is it public-private partnerships?
Most of our funding is about 80% federal government. Sometimes they come up with these cost-sharing programs where the province pays 50% and the national government pays the other 50%. There are some of these programs. Now, in the field of water resources, if we are talking about ecotoxicology, there is no problem about getting funding. If we are talking about hydrology, there is no shortage. When we talk about the economics, everybody gives up, and nobody wants to do that funding. Give you an example. At the University of Saskatchewan, we created a center, National Center for Water Resources. The only 2 positions that were created were one for ecotoxicology and one for hydrology. Economics, the social side, does not exist. And this is the kind of attitude of the federal government and the provincial governments. They recognize the biophysical part being more important than the social side.
Thank you. Also, one question, please.
Elena Lubimtseva, Grand Valley State University. Well, first of all, I wanted to say that your presentation is really music to my ears, and it's really great that you are addressing this extremely important question that social science integration and economics integration is so much underfunded, and we will go nowhere until the situation changes. My question is, what is the discussion in Canada about the role of GMOs as a way of adaptation? Many people consider that going in the direction of integrating more genetically modified crops can be a solution, but on the other hand, this is obviously a huge environmental problem by itself. So what is your position on this?
Well, basically, I think with the new government in place about 5-6 years ago, climate change was removed. They closed the Climate Change Impact and Adaptation Bureau totally out of the government. Therefore, in the name of climate change and adaptation, there is no research funding available right now. Now, this is not to say that the funds are not being provided in some other names, but officially we don't have that kind of research funding.
What about genetically modified crops? How seriously Canada considers GMOs as possible?
I don't think the climate change issue has really surfaced to the point that it has become important in those circles. It's sort of coming up, but I don't think it has come to the point where people say, let's do that.
Good morning, sir. I'm Nitin Lahkar from India. Sir, as you have mentioned in your presentation, that there needs to be an awareness among the people who are actually involved in the practice of agriculture, especially the farmers. So, can you give some suggestions regarding how the farmers in developing countries like India, which are primarily dependent on agriculture, and the most of the farmers, they are not literate. So, how can the alertness can be imbibed into these people about this, about mitigation and the consequences of drought?
Well, one of the things that we have found in Canada that works is an early warning system. By the time farmers realize it's going to be drought year, it's too late for them to make any adaptation. Therefore, the most efficient way to make farmers aware of is through an early warning system by which they can then plan whether they want to change a crop, delay the crop, seed the crop earlier, or do different kinds of cultural practices.
Okay, sorry, we finished. Very, very short.
Early warning systems will have to be done by climatologists. It's not a social side. But we can develop the impact of those, and whenever we had the predictions or the global, in terms of early warning systems, the farmers were much more happier and the economy was more stable.
I tell you the case in India, where I'm from the state of Bihar in India, and this state witnesses multi-hazards, flood as well as drought at the same time. Flood and drought strikes at the same time. Right now we are some part same area having flood and the same area is having drought.
Yeah.
Now the early warning system which you are talking about in India, what is happening, the name of early warning, the Indian Meteorological Department predicts about the rainfall. But most of the prediction made by Indian Meteorological Department is not accurate and sometimes it's go wrong. Most of the time it goes wrong. So I'm really interested to know what early warning system you people have developed in Canada.
Basically, the farmers are using more computers in Canada. And through the computers, there are weather stations that are checking the weather stations. There are information being provided in terms of the forthcoming changes in terms of the climate. So basically, if there is going to be a back-to-back drought, and if the climatological atmospheric conditions are suggesting that, it's better to put that in front of the farmers and let them decide what to do.
How accurate is
Okay,
this information?
sorry.
I'm sorry?
How accuracy
I'm not a climatologist, so I really couldn't answer that. But I think it's very effective because farmers do appreciate it.
You can continue with panel discussion. Thank you very much, Suren, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Special thanks.